Hello and welcome to Module B, Non-Statistical Compliance Obligations for Supply and Service Contractors. Let's start out with a disclaimer. You've seen this before. This is for general information purposes only. It's not intended to provide legal advice. These materials are copyrighted, so they may not be reproduced, copied, or used without the permission of DCI Consulting. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the communication of results and required training. We're going to talk about postings and notice requirements. We're going to talk about record keeping. We're going to talk about EEO1 and VETS 4212 reporting, and then we'll talk about the components of narratives. So specifically, what are we talking about? The data that you send us, we use to create all of the required statistical analytics. So your placement goals, your utilization, your availability, your adverse impact, and all of that good stuff. But there are a lot of pieces of the affirmative action requirements that are not data driven. And so they are equally as important, and we don't want you to forget about those. So let's start with the communication of results and required training. So you are required to do some annual communication. Under 60-2.17 additional requirements for the affirmative action plans, you're required to report your results with all levels of management. You're also required to advise top management of your program effectiveness and submit recommendations to improve unsatisfactory performance. So what does that mean? So if you have a January 1 affirmative action plan and you get your results in February or March, you're required to communicate those responsibilities and results to anyone who touches the affirmative action program, anyone who makes a decision on another individual, and you need to get some buy-in from these folks. So we would split it into a couple of groups. So if you're talking to your executive leaders, your top management, for those people, I would tell them things like, we did our plan. Here are the goals that we currently have. We have several goals that we've had for multiple cycles in a row. We really need to address those. We had these goals last year, and here's how we did. We either met them, we made progress towards them. Here are some things that I think that we need to do over the coming year. Those are the types of things that I would tell top management about. For your line level managers, I would remind them of their obligations of under affirmative action, the non-discrimination obligations. I would tell them what affirmative action is. I would talk to them about what goals they have and what a goal is and what a goal is not, and talk to them about how can you help us make that goal. And those are the types of communications that I would have with those types of managers. You are also required to do training. Under Executive 11246, you're required to train annually anyone involved in recruiting, screening, selection, promotion, disciplinary, and related processes about their EEO obligations. So basically, anybody who makes a decision on another person needs to have some training. They need to know not to discriminate, not to harass, etc. There's also a manual called the Federal Contract and Compliance Manual, or FCCM, you might have heard it called. This is actually an OFCCP internal guidebook, but it's available to everyone. Under their spirit of transparency, you can go out there and read it. And what it is it's a manual that tells them what to do when they're doing an audit. So within that manual, it talks about that the compliance officer should ask some questions around training. Does the contractor provide training to personnel? What kind of training do they provide? When, how frequently, and by who is the training provided? What are the trainer's qualifications? Did the trainer use training materials? What are they? And they can ask for those. So that's all in the affirmative action regulations today, has always been there. Training is something you really need to think seriously about. Let us know if you need help with that, but it is a requirement. So let's talk about posting and notices. So let me kind of read through these and then we're going to go through each one. So you are required to have an equal opportunity clause on purchase orders and contracts. You need to have taglines in your job advertisements. If you are a dual supply and service and construction, or you have some construction contracts that you're awarded, you have to let the OFCCP know that you have new contracts. You have to list all of your jobs with the state and local workforce agencies. If you have unions, you need to talk to them and let them know that you are an equal employment opportunity and what the obligations are. And then you need to have your posters up. So let's kind of walk through each one of these. So your job listings. Contractors must list all employment openings with the state workforce agency or the local. So state or local job agencies, basically. You might also hear them referred to as the ESDS systems. So you have to list all of your jobs. There are some exceptions though. If your job is for executive or senior management position, it does not have to be listed. If it's going to be filled from within, it does not have to be listed. Now, if you're thinking, okay, I think we want to fill this from within, but let's see what kind of external talent we have too, then you would have to list that position. But if you're just going to fill it from within, you do not have to list it. If you've done layoffs and you have a list of people that you're going to bring back from those the layoffs, so you have a recall list, you do not have to list those jobs either. And then if you have a job that's going to last 3 days or fewer, then you don't have to list it. In our world of remote workers, you're probably thinking, where do I list that job? Because you don't know where they're going to end up living. Well, if you're a little bit more specific and you say, okay, we really want them to be kind of close to us, so they could work in Ohio, they could work in Pennsylvania, or they could work in West Virginia. So you might list in those 3 states. If you don't care where they're going to sit, then you could theoretically list in all 50 states. That would be a little difficult, but you could. Or you could list the job where the position supervisor, the division, or the department is located. So you have some options for listing your jobs for remote workers. So there are some specific things you need to do when you list. You need to let the agency know that you are a federal contractor. You need to request priority referral for protected veterans. And you need to give them the name and the address and a contact at the location that's actually doing the hiring. And then you also need to provide the list of all of your openings. If you're doing this by yourself, the form that you fill out is going to have some of these questions on it. If you are using an agency to scrape your site and upload to all of the agencies every day, then they are also providing that information for you. But it just for your own knowledge, you do need to be supplying this information to each of the state and local agencies as you post positions. So let's talk about taglines. There are all kinds of taglines that you can use, all kinds of combinations, kind of depending on, you have options depending on your thresholds and the laws that you have to abide by. So I don't want to go through each one of these, but just know at a minimum you need to have equal opportunity employer, or you could put EOE. If you need to spell out all of your protected groups. If you are not going to spell them out, don't put them in, but you can see way at the bottom, EOE, including vets and disability and vets. Disability and vets under the regulation must be spelled out in whole. So you either need to spell out every protected category, or at a minimum, you need to put EOE including and spell those 2 out. But you have all kinds of options. Just you need to really make sure that they're on every single listing that you have. Your PO and contract language. So they came out a few years ago with this language, and said it needed to be bold and it needed to be in a certain font. And there were actually, you had language for 11246. You had the paragraph that you see below specifically for 503, and another one that was exactly the same with different numbers for VEVRA. And so what people said was, this is an awful lot. If I have 11246, 503, and VEVRA all in separate paragraphs on my each purchase order, that's just going to make it so long and unmanageable. So they are allowing you to combine the paragraphs into one. So that's what you're seeing below. So you do need to, at a minimum, have this combined language in there. for all of your subcontractors, contracts, and purchase orders. There is a threshold, a monetary threshold for putting this on, but most employers just put it on all of them. They don't necessarily have the ability to take language off and put language on at, as they need it. So you have required posters. You probably know a lot about all of these, but you have both federal and state posters that are required. And you have a couple of ways to do this. You could get them individually from each website, and those will be free, but they would also be single page. So you would have a single page to print out and post on your bulletin boards. Or you could get a contract with a third-party vendor and get one of they're called all-in-one posters. They're expensive, but at least you would have, everything laminated on one sheet for you. So you have a few options also on how you list or post these posters. If you have a brick and mortar, you need to put them in a break room. If you are accepting applications, you need to put them where you're accepting applications. You could put them on your website. You need to put them on your applicant tracking system website so that an applicant, if they don't come in at all for interviews anymore, that they can get to them online. So these are just some pictures of the state and federal, the laminated ones that you can get. Again, they are expensive, but it might be an easier, a nicer looking way to go. The problem with these is if one regulation changes, then you have this poster that's got everything on it, and you kind of have to print off the new poster and then put it over the section of one of these laminated ones, or buy a brand new laminated poster, which is expensive. So your choice, but you do have some options. So you have to have a statement of policy. This is specifically for 503 and VEVRA. This policy needs to talk about how you're not going to discriminate against these groups, and it talks a lot about who's responsible for implementing policy. And then right at the bottom is probably the most important piece of this. So this 503 and VEVRA must be available for any applicant or employee who requests to see it, but you need to tell them when they can do that. So you could say, call human resources, or it'll be available in human resources between 3 and 5 o'clock on Fridays, whatever you want to put on there. But you need to let people know how they can request to see these plans. 11246 is not covered under this regulation, so please do not show them that affirmative action plan or that narrative. For 503 and VEVRA, show them the narrative portion only. Take out the pieces of the statistics that are included in the plan. So all those statistical reports associated with 503 and VEVRA, you're going to want to take those out and only show someone who requests to see this, the written portions of the document. You also have to tell unions that you're an affirmative action employer. We all know that they have a contract, but we also need them to know that we have to abide by certain laws, and that they need to also abide by those. And I would also encourage you that when it's time to redo your union contract, that you look at those things, that look for things like promotions and discipline and compensation, and make sure that there's non-discrimination language in your contracts if you can. But you do need to send them a notice letting them know that you are an affirmative action employer. This construction award probably doesn't apply to a lot of people, but there are some sales and service organizations who also have some spinoffs. So if you do have any new construction contracts for more than $10,000, you do need to tell the OFCCP that. So let's talk about record keeping. So record keeping can be a little bit tricky, but you are required to keep all of your records associated, again, with any decision that was made on an applicant or an employee. So if everything is electronic to you, you need to be able to pull it off of your system and provide it to the OFCCP, an employment application, for example. And you may not be able to just hit print and print an application off, but you can do screenshots, but you need to be able to provide anything that's electronic. You need to be able to provide that to the OFCCP. So maintaining records, it's kind of all over the board. So there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind. So we've got federal requirements. We have requirements for 11246. We also have VEVRA and 503 requirements. And then you also have state requirements. Okay, so for 11246, you're required to keep all of your documents for 2 years for 2 years from the date of the making the record, or when an action was taken. So let me give you an example. So if I apply for a job at your company February 12th of 2020, let's make that up, and then you don't look at my application until March of 2021, then from March of 2021 is 2 years forward, that's when you keep my record. So whichever is later. If you're a small employer and you have 150 employees or less and a contract of less than 150,000, then you would only keep things for 1 year. But if you are under a compliance evaluation, you need to keep all records until that compliance review is done. And I would even keep it a little bit beyond that until you know the outcome of that evaluation. Now, those state laws, there are many of them that are longer than 2 years. So I would keep your records based on the longest record keeping time. And I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. So for VEVRA, you have a 3-year period that you are supposed to keep things. So your evaluation of outreach that you have to be doing, all of your data collection analysis, your benchmarks, you have to keep all of that for 3 years. And again, if you have a complaint, you need to make sure that you keep that until there's an outcome. So what records are we even talking about here? So anything dealing with the hiring process, your self-ID forms, any kind of assignment, promotion, demotion, transfer, layoffs, any termination records, when you change someone's pay, if you're selecting people for certain training programs or apprenticeship programs, anything having to do with reasonable accommodations, physical examinations, your job advertisements, your postings, your applications itself, resumes, any expressions of interest, all of your tests and your test results. So all of these records, and as I mentioned, it's easiest to say any decision that was made on another person needs to be kept. So that's kind of the way I kind of like to think about it. But let's look at this. So this is a state requirement. So this state is requiring resumes, applications, related employment documents to be kept for 6 years. Handbook policies, 6 years. Written contracts, 8 years. Compensation and time records, 3 years after terminations. See, so then you've got this caveat here where you have the termination. So you really have to be careful about when you're destroying records. And I would just go again with the longest, the latest time. So, you know, if we have a 3-year for veterans, a 2 years for 11246, and I live in this state, I would be keeping all of my records for this amount of time. So now let's talk about database searches. So there are some obligations for keeping all of your database searches. And there's a little bit of a difference between internal database searches and external database searches, and the different records that we keep and analyze. So let's talk first about, you know, what are we talking about? So an internal database is going to be your internal ATS. So those people have already submitted an application somehow, maybe just put in a profile with you, but that you've got all of their application contained within a system that you own on your property, basically, hypothetically. An external search is going to be Monster, LinkedIn, Indeed, and all of those various job boards. So if you're doing an internal database search, there's 5 things that you need to keep. Now remember that you have these records. These records are available to you at all times. If you go to Indeed and Monster and do a search, you don't know where those applications have gone. You could do a second search 10 minutes later and get a whole different set of applications and resumes on like a Monster. So when it's internal, there's a little bit different set of things that you should keep. So each day's resume added to the database. Well, you already have that. That's in there. You can get to it if you need to it. The date each resume was added to the database. You've got that information. It's contained within your records. The position for which the search of the database was made. So if I'm searching in my database for a loan originator, I need to somehow jot down when did I do that search and what did I search for? What were the criteria I used to search? So what I would recommend that you do a search, 10 people's names come up. I do a screenshot of those 10 names that came up, and then I'd write on that screenshot, loan originator, needed 3 years experience, or whatever I was looking for, and the date I did that search. And those would be the records that I keep, because I can get to these other two because they are housed within my database. For an external database, there's 4 requirements here. They're a little bit complicated, so some of them look similar. So the position for each search. So again, loan originator, what criteria, 3 years experience and a high school diploma, whatever it was. I did the search today. The resumes of job seekers who met the basic qualifications. This is where it gets really complicated. So if I did a search today on Monster for loan originator, I guarantee I'm going to get 5,000 hits. There's no way I can print off and look through 5,000 resumes. It's just not going to happen. So at this point, you need to be thinking about your data management techniques, and you can listen to our applicant module, module I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, you can listen to our applicant module and kind of get a feel for what this is. But if I have 5,000 people that came up on my list, at that point, I need to say, okay, I'm going to go through the first 25 and figure out who meets the basic qualifications. And if 10 of them meet the basic qualifications and I think I can make my hire, those are the 10 resumes that you need to be logging here. So again, we have a whole module on data management and applications. I'd listen to that for sure. We also have webinars. We've done white papers. So there's plenty of resources. Call your consultant on what you need to be keeping here, because this can get really complicated, this number 4. So the EEO1 and VETS report. So EEO1 report, you're going to submit a report for every one of your locations, and it's going to have the race and gender and EEO category for each of your individuals who are in that location. It is due by March 31st annually. Sometimes that varies depending, I know one year they got a new system and so they extended the deadline, but typically it's March 31st. The VETS report is going to be for federal contractors and some contractors, and it lists all of the veterans who are currently in your workforce as of a certain day, and then any veterans that you hired during the previous 12 months. It is currently filed annually by September 30th. So the EEO1 report is for private employers who are subject to Title VII and have more than 100 employees. Or if you're a federal contractor with 50 or more employees, you have a prime or first year contract of at least $50,000. Or if you are a depository financial institution, you also need to file your EEO1 reports. Who is not included in an EEO1 report are your state and local governments, your school systems. They actually file a different kind of report in some cases, and then any tax exempt type organizations. So your VETS report and your EEO1 report have definitions of employee. So it's going to be anyone who is on your payroll as of a specific date for which you are withholding Social Security taxes. You're not going to include casual employees or temporary employees that are paid through another source on these reports. So these are only people who are on your payroll at a specific time. For the VETS 4212, it's for federal contractors and subcontractors. If you're not a federal contractor, you're not required to file a VETS report. There is a threshold of 150,000. There's no minimum count. So we saw before, a minimum of 100 employees or a minimum of 50 employees. There is no minimum here. And then you're doing this on a calendar year as well. So for the VETS 4212, you can begin pulling your information and a payroll date as early as July. You start filing between August and September 30th. Your new hires are going to be between from 12 months back from whatever your payroll period is. There is a caveat with the payroll period here. So it used to be that both the VETS and the EEO1 reports were both filed by September 30th. And then they moved the filing of the EEO1 to March 31st and left the VETS at September 30th. It was a little bit of a burden on employers to pull reports twice. So they do have a caveat in there that you can use a payroll snapshot for VETS either between August 1st and September 30th, or actually July 1st and September 30th, or you could use your Q4 snapshot for filing. And the reason they do that is then you can use one snapshot and file both your VETS and your EEO1 report. And that was to take some of the burden off of employers. So let's talk about your narratives. So what you see here is a list of everything that should be included in the narratives. Anything that is in red is not a statistical report. So everything else is going to be covered by statistics and some of our other reports that we have. So we're going to focus on a few of the ones that are in red. So specifically, we've talked a little bit about the statement of policy already. We're going to talk about responsibility for implementation and action-oriented programs. So the responsibility for implementation. So you need to pick someone out in your organization. In this case, it's probably you. It could be your HR director or an EEO officer, but who is responsible for getting things done. So while the language is a little bit strong here, it does not mean that you have to do everything. It doesn't mean that you have to change policy. It doesn't mean that you personally have to change everything about your organization. It just means that the person whose name is in this report needs to be a driver. It needs to be a person who can go to an HR director and say, hey, we have some adverse impact and we need to be looking at it here. Or gosh, this policy, can we look at our policies this year? We need to look at doing some different outreach. So while you don't need to be the person who is physically doing things, needs to be a person who can get things done. So, right, what kinds of things are you going to have to get done? So we'll kind of go through a few of these, but again, the reality is you need to help get them implemented. So implementing the AAPs, including development of policy statements and disseminating those policy statements. Again, you may not write that policy statement, but you need to help get that done and get it disseminated. Developing and supervising the presentation of EEO policy during supervisor training and new employee orientations. And again, you don't have to go do that, but you need to make sure that there are pieces within the training that cover what you need to have covered. Implementing and designing and implementing an audit and reporting system that measures the effectiveness. Well, those are the reports that we give you. So if we give you reports and they show you have placement goals or they show you have adverse impact, you would just need to be the one that says, hey, recruiting director, we have goals here. How can we make sure that we're doing our outreach properly? So you're going to take the measurements that we're giving you and try and make sure that they're getting implemented inside the house. Advising management supervisor personnel on developments in the laws and regulations. So as things change, we're going to let you know, and then you just need to disseminate that out, whatever's important to your company. Serving as a liaison between the contractor and OFCCP. This may not be you. So I know a lot of companies that I work with, it's the attorney that's the liaison between the OFCCP and the company, but the attorney doesn't have all the answers, right? So if the OFCCP needs something, the liaison is probably going to come back to you and say, hey, we need to find the following documents, or can you tell me why this happened in the data, etc. Identifying and implementing action-oriented programs. Again, you've got the data. You're the one that will be getting the data, and you just need to find the right owners within your company to help do some research and make sure there's no discrimination happening. Conferring with community organization representing women and minorities. Again, that's probably going to be your recruiters doing those types of things. So you just want to make sure, as the owner of the implementer of this plan, that is happening. Periodically auditing on-the-job training, hiring, promotion patterns. Again, working with people within your organization to make sure that somebody is looking at those things. And then serving as a liaison between the contractor community and organizations. That's kind of similar to the one above. Anyway, it's the same principle. So you're going to be talking to the recruiters probably and saying, hey, we have goals. What are we going to do? Can you reach out to some more organizations? And then developing expertise and knowledge of the employment opportunity guidelines and regulations and advising management. So we're going to help you through all of this. If you have questions on any of this, if you are this person, just let us know. We're happy to help you. Action-oriented programs. So if you have placement goals, or if you have adverse impact, if you have anything going on that needs to be done as a result of your statistical analysis, you need to come up with specific and result-oriented actions to resolve any issues that you find. And we can help you do that. Basically, if you had a placement goal for females in a professional job group, you don't want to just go to the recruiters and say, hey, you got this goal, go do something. That really wouldn't be specific, and it really wouldn't be results oriented. So you need to have full conversations and develop here are the things that we want to do to accomplish this. So as you can see right away, the narrative for Section 503 in VEVRA, there's a lot more red on the screen. So there are not many statistical reports associated with 503 and VEVRA. And the ones that we have are covered in other sections. So we're going to focus kind of around the red sections. We talked a little bit about the policy statement. So within this policy statement, it needs to have who is the top U.S. official who is supporting EEO policy at your company. It needs to identify an EEO person, probably you, maybe not, could be your HR director or someone like that, who is responsible for that implementation of the AP. This should start sounding familiar to you from what we just talked about in the Executive Order 11246 narrative. You know, it's got to have a statement about non-discrimination. It's got to have a statement about you're not going to be harassed or intimidated. It's a pretty basic policy statement, but it has very specific items that you have to put in here. And so in our narrative, if you're using our narrative template, it is already in there. If you're using your own narrative template, you're going to want to make sure that you're covering all of these in your policy statement. Review of personnel processes. So this is one of the things that is actually requested from the OFCCP at the time of an audit. So it's very important. So what you want to do is you want to talk about with your internal resources processes. What is the process for hiring? What is the process for promotion? What is the process for compensation increases? And are those Are those processes free of discrimination and free of barriers in this case? Um, so you don't want to put anything in there that may hinder a person with a disability or a veteran from moving up in the organization, getting increase, et cetera. And let me give you an example. If you have a process that says you have to be in your current position for 6 months before you apply to another job, and you cannot have been on leave for the prior 3 months of that 6 months. That might be a perfectly sound process, right? And it still could be after you review it. But that would be one that you would have to review, because if you think about it, what if I'm a veteran? I got called away to do service. I came back. I worked I came back, but I missed those 3 months in that 6 month window. Um, is it still acceptable that I can't move to another job? Maybe it is. Not saying it's not. Um, or if I'm an individual with a disability and I take a leave and I'm gone for 2 weeks out of that 6 months, and the policy says I can't have been on leave for 3 months prior. Does that hinder the movement of an individual with disability? If it's applied consistently, if there's good rationale behind it, you're probably just fine. But those are the types of things that you're going to want to look at least every year or every couple of years to make sure that they are still relevant. Physical and mental qualifications. This is another item on the itemized listings for an audit. So what does this mean? So you want to look at your job descriptions and your job postings, and you want to look at them and make sure that there's nothing in there, again, that would disqualify or screen out a veteran or a disabled person. Some examples: must be able to stand long periods of time with no breaks. Must be able to see and visual and read safety signs. Must be able to lift 50 pounds. So are those things okay? They might be okay. Absolutely, they might be okay. But you need to look at your descriptions to make sure they are relevant for the position. If I'm an administrative assistant sitting in an office, is it relevant for me to have something on my job description that says must stand for long periods of time, must lift 50 pounds? Maybe not. If I'm a welder, does it make sense to have must be able to stand for long periods of time? Probably. Must be able to lift 50 pounds? Probably. So you just need to look at those things and make sure that when you apply them to the job that they're on, is it still relevant? And you need to do that periodically. And when you make changes to these processes or to your mental or physical qualifications, just write it down when you did it and what you changed, because they'll be asking that in an audit. Reasonable accommodations. This is straight out of the ADA. If you're able to make an accommodation, we recommend that you do. If it is an undue hardship, you do need to kind of qualify why, but you need to keep track of all those, because you do have to turn this in the event of an audit as well. So if you deny someone's accommodation, you need to just say, okay, denied on this date and here's why. Or, if you did good things, if you gave everybody accommodations, put what they were and when they were given. Need to have a harassment policy. I think everybody probably does. You need to make sure that it has non-discrimination. You're not going to harass people because they're a veteran or an individual with disability, or most companies put all of the statuses in there. So regardless of your sexual orientation, gender identity, race, gender, religious, most companies put all of those in there and include veterans or disabilities with that. So your external dissemination of policy, we've talked a little bit about this already, and your outreach and positive recruitment. There's a whole module dedicated to good faith efforts and outreach. I highly recommend it. The OFCCP is focusing in this area, and so we're seeing some violations come through in this area. So I would highly recommend listening to that other module. But you do need to send out you need to post your policy, you need to send out notices to, if you have a temp contractor that you have a large contract with, I'm not talking one that, every 6 months I have somebody send me a temporary employee. This is a bigger contract, a threshold size contract. You need to send them a notice telling them that they need to be abiding by affirmative action regulations, because they are a subcontractor based on the size of the contract. You also need to, we talked about notifying your unions. So there's a lot of external dissemination that does need to happen. Inside the house, we need to make sure that in our policy manual, we have our harassment policy, our non-discrimination policy. We need to post on our bulletin boards our statement of policy. If you have a union, you need to let the union know, we talked about this already, that you abide by affirmative action principles. And then this is going to look really familiar to you as well, responsibility for implementation. If it's you, again, this is just a person who is kind of holding the ship together and making sure that things are getting done. So you do need to designate also within the vets and the disabled narrative who that person would be. So these links aren't live, obviously, to you within this training, but you can copy them down. These are critical technical assistance guides. They are going to give you step by step the things that you need to think about. They're really important documents, and so I would highly advise you to go ahead and go out and take a look at them. I've talked about other modules that are available. So this is, all the modules we'll be adding to this portal as we go along. I think it's a really great opportunity to listen to each module in succession, or, if you just got an audit, then just listen to audit basics, or gosh, I can't remember, how do we get to availability? Then I might listen to that module as well. I want to thank you so much for participating today. You can always call your DCI consultant about any question or comment, or if you need more information, we're always happy to help you. Or if you would rather just send something to our email box, you can send it to info@dciconsult.com. Thank you and have a great day.